So today I learned that trying to get keyboard and mouse to work with emulation is quite the undertaking. It isn't easy and it's overly complicated for some reason. I tried it with many emulators, and today I'm going to share with you my journey that I went on through frustration on trying to get many games to work, and also some really interesting use case for it. So I use an Xbox One controller. I also have so many other controllers lying around that I use whenever I emulate games. So for me, keyboard and mouse has never been something that I've ever tried on this sort of thing. But I know a lot of people from the comments that I get and in the Discord community that some of you do use keyboard and mouse, whether you just don't have a controller or you actually prefer to use keyboard and mouse over controller. I'm sure there are many other use cases on why you would want to use a keyboard and mouse, and so I wanted to explore it. Like, how do you set it up? What games are actually compatible with it? Are there any games that actually natively support it? Pretty much all those questions were actually answered whilst I explored this. The thing is, the answers weren't exactly ideal. Naturally, I gravitated towards the era that I grew up in, which was the PlayStation 2 and GameCube era, and so I used PCSX2 to try to emulate keyboard and mouse. And this is just extremely janky. I can see why nothing really comes up when you try to search this online, because it borderline just doesn't work, and I would not recommend doing this at all. If you want to give it a shot anyway, you can essentially make your mouse emulate an analog stick within PCSX2 and some other emulators. One thing that's super important across basically every emulator when you're using keyboard and mouse is to set up the interface settings correctly. What I mean by this is when you go to settings, say in PCSX2, on the interface section, you'll notice that there are a few things here that we do not want to do. For example, we don't want it so that when we double click, we toggle full screen. Otherwise then whenever we shoot in quick succession, it's gonna unfull screen the game. We also do want to hide the cursor in full screen, obviously, but then we also don't want to hide it in certain things like gun-con games if we want to use the cursor as opposed to crosshairs. This will make coming in and out of full screen and other actions a bit more complicated since the mouse is invisible. So what you want to do is come to your hotkey settings inside your controller settings, and then just make sure that you have a hotkey to exit full screen. For me, I have this set to Alt-Enter. Then for actually binding your keyboard and mouse, it is as simple as just clicking the button and then clicking the respective keyboard and mouse input. Then right here in the global settings, you can enable something called Enable Mouse Mapping. That will essentially allow your mouse to be used like an analog stick. After this option is set, you just come to the controller input section, and then here in the right analog stick, it will now allow you to set all of the different points of action to the mouse. That way I can just click up and move my mouse up, and as you can see, it will bind it. Again, I wouldn't recommend this. From my experience, it's borderline unusable. That's where I discovered Mouse Injection though. There's basically this program that you can open whilst you run supported games, and then you click a button and it will basically magically inject the mouse into the game. This uses a lot of hacky workarounds to get it working, so I've heard, and pretty much this feels like a native PC port. I'm not even kidding when I say that I was playing Black, for example, which is a game that never got a PC port, and I was playing it with keyboard and mouse perfectly. It was actually insane. Also, this is the perfect opportunity to talk about analog movement, but with a keyboard. It gives you that controller-like movement so you can just walk slowly instead of, a normal keyboard where it's just go or don't go. I'm super late to the whole analog keyboard, and I was actually never thinking of getting one at all, but Wu-Tang actually sent this out. This isn't sponsored or anything, but they sent this out and I genuinely love this keyboard. Like, ever since I got it, I had this old custom keyboard that I made that is really good, don't get me wrong, but this new keyboard and having that analog movement has actually made some games that I played so much better. Like, I've been playing Alan Wake recently, and using the analog movement inside Alan Wake has been so fun. And I got it working in PCSX2. Basically, the Wu-Tang software allows you to set certain keys to be certain controller inputs. So for example, what I did was set WASD to be like pushing down, left, right, and up on a gamepad. Then you can set the actuation points and how aggressive you want it to be, and pretty much all I had to do was open PCSX2 and set these keys by just lightly tapping on them, and then pretty much when that was all done, it was basically controller-like input but on a keyboard. That combined with this mouse injector thing is just so amazing. I can't get over how well this was working. Anyway, I wanted to obviously try more games with this, so I went to TimeSplitter, and it just didn't work. This is kind of the downhill spiral that we're about to get into, where stuff just starts to not work properly. The thing is though, TimeSplitter is on the list of compatible games, so I wasn't quite sure what was going wrong here. Also, some of these games have patches which are included in the mouse injector. These patches vary on what they do, but they pretty much delete anything that would otherwise ruin the mouse and keyboard experience. I tried different versions of TimeSplitter and different patches and all of that, and I just couldn't get it to work. So then I switched over to the Dolphin emulator, and I tried to use TimeSplitter 2 because that was supposedly supported as well. That also didn't work. I was starting to think that this whole thing was just a bit too janky to be actually useful, but in a lot of the emulators you can actually set up per game controller profiles. This not only makes the whole process more streamlined, but it's super useful for a lot of the games from this era because they often move around the key bindings. You'll have one game that uses square to reload and another one that uses circle. So by using this method, you can set it up so that the same button uses reload on all of your games. To do this inside PCSX2, inside the controller settings, you just click New Profile at the bottom. Then you enter the name, so for example, I'll make one for black, and I'll just call it black. Then you just set up your key bindings how you want them. After you've done with that, you close, and then right-click the game that you want to set it to, or whilst you're in the game, you can click Game Properties as well. Then inside Summary, the input profile, you'll just set to this new black controller profile. And then you can do this for every single game. Now you might be thinking this, because I sure was, but light gun games. Surely light gun games are going to be incredible with this thing. The thing is, the way it works, it doesn't exactly make it a light gun game. For example, I tried this with DuckStation. There's a game called Resident Evil Survivor, if anyone's played that. That is an extremely odd sort of spin-off Resident Evil game, and pretty much using the mouse injector with this made it so that it was a first-person shooter, which isn't a bad thing, but it's not exactly what the original was, where it was more light gun coded. The thing is though, for DuckStation and PCSX2, you can actually set up the light guns that those consoles came with. So when I did that, then I got to use it like a proper light gun. I was having issues though setting this up with DuckStation, but just trust me, I did have this set up before. To actually prove that it can be done though, I tried Time Crisis on PCSX2, and that worked flawlessly. I mean, I say flawlessly, the only thing that was wrong with it was the mouse input was kind of delayed, especially on the left hand side and the right hand side of the screen. Where the crosshair wasn't quite where my cursor was. Saying that though, being able to play light gun games with a mouse and keyboard is incredibly fun. No, it's not the same as having a light gun or a Wiimote even, but still, you know, if you're into those sort of twitchy shooters like I am, being able to sort of like almost aim train, but in a retro game is really cool. To do this inside the controller settings, instead of coming to the controller ports, go to the USB ports. Then in here, you can just click here and select the gun con. These are the settings that I have set up for Time Crisis 2, and as you can see, relative aiming is completely blank, and that's on purpose. If you set this up, it's more to emulate an analog movement for aiming, whereas we don't want that, we just want the mouse movement. So by leaving this blank, when you go into game, it will just be perfect to where your mouse is on the screen. There is another thing with the PS2, I might get roasted in the comments for not knowing this, but the PS2 actually had a mouse and keyboard, and you can emulate that within PCSX2. That was really easy to set up within the USB port section of the inputs. You can basically have it so your controller's plugged in, which I did, just in case I needed to, you know, use any menus, and then you make USB port 1 a HID keyboard, and then USB port 2 HID mouse, and then you just bind everything up, and you can play this game like a basic native PC port. I tried this with Final Fantasy Cerberus and it works surprisingly well. My mouse sensitivity was quite low and I couldn't find anywhere in the settings to actually up that, but just playing it regardless is really quite an interesting experience. I thought maybe this would be really smooth because it's natively supported, but it wasn't actually as smooth and as nice to play as Black was with the mouse injector. It still was, again, a surreal experience to play a PS2 game with mouse and keyboard. Moving away from PCSX2, I wanted to try out the Wii since that has motion controls, and I wanted to see how keyboard and mouse would work with that. So I moved over to the Dolphin emulator and tried out a few games. Setting up the Wiimote with keyboard and mouse is actually surprisingly really easy inside Dolphin. You just want to click the controllers menu at the top. Then in here you just want to make sure the Wii Remote 1 is set to emulated Wii Remote, and then click configure. And then here you just set up everything like you would in any other emulator, but with your keyboard this time. And then in motion simulation, this is the more important stuff, you can just click use mouse controlled pointing, and that will just emulate the Wiimote's cursor, but for your mouse. Then a lot of the games require that you shake the Wii Remote in certain points, so bind that to a certain key. I bind this to the middle mouse button on my mouse. I then didn't set up tilt, and I just bind swing to my arrow keys just in case. The thing is with this, you don't want to play Wii games that rely too heavily on motion controls because it's just going to be super awkward to use. For things that only require pointing with the mouse and shaking, that's fine though. For example, I tried Red Steel 2, and the shooting and overall gameplay was easy and it was really intuitive to use. But then I got to a certain point in the game where I couldn't get past it because I needed to swing the Wii Remote behind my back and swing it like a katana, and obviously that's really hard to replicate through this emulator without having a real Wii Remote. So you want to go with games with more simple motion controls. Things like Super Mario Galaxy work amazingly well. There's also quite a few light gun-esque games for the Wii. These games are instances where using a keyboard and mouse is actually the preferred way to play, as opposed to a Wii Remote. That's always going to be the best way. Also, I got Breath of the Wild working with keyboard and mouse. I mean, it looks like Breath of the Wild running with keyboard and mouse, but due to international copyright laws, it's actually not. It most certainly is though, but it's not. This one is a bit more complicated to set up, and it requires two things. You first need to install something called VJoy, which is a pretty straightforward installation, and then mouse to joystick. There's a CEMU version of it that comes with controller profiles, and you just want to drag and drop those into the correct CEMU folder. And then inside the input settings of CEMU, you just want to select those profiles, and then in-game F1 is the default key to activate the mouse. I noticed instantly though that this was way too slow and sluggish. I did a bit of research and I just found out that Breath of the Wild sensitivity is really low. So what you have to do is go into the graphic packs of CEMU, and in there's a mouse sensitivity mod that fixes it. I wouldn't usually play a game like this with keyboard and mouse. These story-driven third-person adventure games I usually stick to controller with, but definitely for stuff like aiming the bow, it's now a lot easier. Sadly though, compared to the mouse injector, this isn't as native feeling. You can definitely feel that this is in a way emulating an analog stick still, but it's a lot better than say the default PCSX2 analog emulation. I'll be honest, I knew going into this that I wasn't going to come out of it using keyboard and mouse on all my emulator games, but for sure the light gun games specifically, that's an instance where I would use it. And also Black and any other games that work with this mouse injector program, that's an instance where I could see myself actually playing through Black from start to finish now in the modern day, rather than just not playing at all. Because the thing is, for me personally, I've used keyboard and mouse for years to play FPS games, so playing them on a controller really feels like I'm fighting with the hardware, whereas playing Black for the first time on keyboard and mouse was truly a really good experience, and I'd recommend anyone try that out, because there are tons of FPS games that are on the PS2 and many other eras that never got PC ports, and they're terrific shooters. They just need that precision from the mouse. All in all, I had a lot of fun trying this out, and I want to make more content like this in between my other uploads. Just stuff where we can just quickly try something out that's interesting or cool, that's not necessarily totally groundbreaking like some of the other stuff that I cover. If you did enjoy it, then please like and subscribe, and also tell me in the comments if you've got keyboard and mouse working on some emulated games, and which ones you've had the most fun playing. Also, I need to thank the Patreons who support me monthly. You can do the same from just £1 a month, and all of the tiers receive the exact same benefits. Becoming a Patreon member gets you access to the Patreon posts, which is just basically all of the behind the scenes content and extra stuff that I don't share elsewhere goes onto there. Stuff like my recent wallpaper pack, where I basically took a bunch of thumbnails and just turned them into lovely wallpapers that you can put on. You also get an exclusive role in the Discord to show off your Patreon status. Anyway, if you enjoyed this video, I bet you'd like these two. There's one where I tested out CRT shaders, which are huge for retro games, and also the other one on the right where I tested out some texture packs. Both of these are this sort of same video where it's just cool tinkering with retro games to see how we can get them to play and look as best as possible. See you over there.